You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 53. For this episode, I'm going to be interviewing Alexandra Amor, who is an award-winning mystery author. Alexandra also has her own podcast called It's a Mystery Podcast, where she interviews authors, and I was one of her guests in a recent episode. So afterwards, I asked her if she'd be a guest on my podcast, and she said yes. I'll be bringing that interview to you here shortly. Before doing that, I'd like to ask for your support for one of our former guests. John Hindmarsh was on episode number 42, and he writes sci-fi thrillers, techno-thrillers, and his latest book, The Darwin Project, is up on Kindle Scout. You can go to www.thrillingreads.com/Darwin, and that will take you to his Kindle Scout page, and you can look at he's got a beautiful cover. You can go look at the cover there and read the first few pages, and then click on the Nominate Me button there. John is part of my local Northern California meetup group for writers, so I know him in real life. And if you're not familiar with Kindle Scout, the way it works, it's an Amazon company, and it's a reader-powered publishing for new, never-before published books. So it's a place where readers help decide if a book gets published. And so it's open for votes right now as of the recording this podcast. I think you have about 20-some days left. Once the voting ends, the votes are counted, and those with the most votes, those books get forwarded on to Kindle Press, which is an Amazon publishing house, and then their editors go through their process and decide whether or not to publish the book. So it's a great way to get his book attention from the Kindle Press editors, and if they do select his book for publishing, you will get a free copy directly from Amazon, so that's a pretty sweet deal. So go to thrillingreads.com/Darwin. Really would appreciate your support for John. All right, so let's get on to episode number 53, my interview with Alexandra Amor. Hi, everybody. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author, and for this episode, I'm interviewing Alexandra Amor, and I have her on Skype. How are you doing, Alexandra?
Very well, thanks, Alan. How are you?
I am doing good. Kind of the shoe on the other foot now, because you interviewed me a couple of weeks ago for your podcast.
That's right. Yes, exactly. So we've switched roles today.
Can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, please?
Certainly, yeah. So I'm an independently published author, and my first book was actually way out of the thriller and mystery genre. It was a memoir about 10 years I spent in a cult in the 1990s. And right now I'm working on a mystery series. It's a historical mystery series set in British Columbia, and it centers around a small town called Horse, a fictional town, I should say. And the protagonist is a young woman, a school teacher named Julia Tom, who has landed in that little town and runs into all kinds of mysteries she needs to solve.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. So I was very interested in the historical aspect of your mysteries. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, is there actual a lot of history then that you have to do research for, or how does that work out with the history component?
Yeah, the history component certainly does add a layer of complexity, compared to writing in the present day. And I specifically wanted to set it right at the end of the 19th century like that. I wanted to set it after the railroad had connected Canada from end to end, which happened in 1885, but before cars and telephones. So that's why I chose 1890. And I've done research. There's a museum and archives in a small town there in the central Okanagan, which is the area that the books is set in. And the real town is called Vernon. And so I've spent time at the museum and archives there, learning about what it was like. They have newspapers going back right to the late 1880s. It might even be the mid 1880s. And it's fascinating, really, to learn about how people lived. And, it just makes me reflect on how easy our lives are right now, and how really challenging everything was basically for the entire history of humanity until the last 60 or 70 years.
Yeah, that would be amazing. And then I was also thinking I was thinking of the challenges of writing something set in the 19th century. Did you find that also challenging to not say they picked up the mobile phone or they sent an email like the other way? I think both things would be challenging.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And it is tricky, I have to say, and not so much with technology because that's sort of front of my mind. But what's really challenging is expressions and idioms and that kind of thing. So I'm trying to think of one right now, something like, somebody's their wheels were spinning, or that's not a good example, but their pistons weren't firing. Well, then you think, well, I can't use that because the engines had barely started to exist. And so, and more modern expressions as well, just the way that we speak now is a little bit different than people spoke back then. And readers will even pick up on that. And I've had a couple of complaints about how the language is a little bit modern. So it's something I have to work really hard at. And it's definitely not easy. It's a bit of a challenge.
And readers, so you mentioned the readers, so they're pretty vocal when you don't get the little things right or something?
Absolutely, yeah. They'll mention it in the reviews, and point out little mistakes, which I actually appreciate because it helps me to learn. But I have had several bits of feedback about that, so I'm learning.
Yeah. And so now the cozy mystery. Can you tell us a little bit about that genre?
Yeah, the genre is really, it sort of harkens back to the Agatha Christie days, and they're usually set in a very small community and kind of an enclosed community, and in this case, it's a small town. There are usually a number of recurring characters that pop up in the town, and then the murder itself always happens off stage. So the protagonist, the sleuth, will find the dead body, but there's never really any violence, on the page. The person is just dead. And then the sleuth is often an amateur. Sometimes they're a police officer or a private detective, like we think of Hercule Poirot. He's a good example. He was a detective, but Miss Marple wasn't, and she's kind of the quintessential cozy mystery protagonist, just kind of nosy and a busybody, and I don't write my mysteries this way, but very often they can be centered around. There's a lot of books that are centered around crafts, so knitting shops, that kind of thing, and also food. There's a lot of food-related cozy mysteries as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating genre. I've seen that even there's like cat sleuths.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Animals, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And so, what's the sleuth in your books? What's their background?
So her name is Julia, and she was raised by a judge closer to the coast in British Columbia, and she's really smart, and she was an only child and really connected to her dad. He was kind of the center of her world, and so because he was a judge, she grew up assuming that she would be able to go to law school and to kind of follow in his footsteps. And then very late in her teens, well, actually on into her 20s, it sort of became rudely apparent to her that she couldn't. Women weren't allowed in law school in Canada at that time. And so she's had a bit of a fracture in her family, and she had a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to this. She feels very betrayed by her father because he won't support her desire to go to law school. So that's how she ends up in this tiny little town. She applies for a job as the school teacher and gets it, I think kind of to her surprise, and then begins to meet people and make friendships and find her way in the world in that place, and meanwhile solving lots of crimes.
How many books do you have in that series so far?
There are 2 so far, and I'm working on the 3rd one. The first one is a prequel, and it's actually available for free on my website. And then the first full-length novel is also free, and it's available at all the online retailers. It's called Horse with No Name.
So I like your website is alexandraamor.com, so people want to go check that out and get introduced to your writing for free. That's awesome. Yeah,
it's a good way to get people introduced to the series.
Yeah, and I was noticing on your website you also write romantic mysteries. So what's the challenge between those two and the differences?
Yeah, I've only written one of those, and I really enjoyed it. And it's set in the modern day, or the present time, so a lot less challenging in terms of writing in a historical period. And I just wanted to see what I could do in terms of writing a mystery and at the same time having a little bit of a love story go on. And the thing about a romantic mystery, as it were, is that there has to be a happily ever after at the end. So the couple has to come together. So that one will be a series, I think, that will be set in the same location, but each book will have a different central character, and there will be a love story involved. And the first one's called Love and Death at the Inn, and it's set also on the west coast of British Columbia, on a small island, and the main character is a woman who's running an inn that she inherited from her parents.
So when you write, do you like focus on one series at a time, or do you like jump around writing two at the same time?
Yeah, great question. I don't jump around. No, I do tend to focus. I think what I would like to do now is get 3 or 4 more books written in the horse series and really get some momentum building with that, and then I might be able to go back and forth and do one in one series and one in the other. But we'll just have to see how it goes.
Yeah, I'm very impressed with you. You write in several different genres too. You write for kids, right? It looks like.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow. And so is that how does which one's your preferred, or you can't choose one? Putting you on the spot.
Exactly. Yeah. I can't choose one. The children's books really came from a very heartfelt place when I was first starting to write fiction, and as so many authors are, I was a big reader when I was a kid, and lots of my favorite books had animal characters. Charlotte's Web and that kind of thing, Stuart Little, and so I wanted to write a series with animals as the main characters. So it's the Sugar and Clive series of books. There's 4 novels, and they're for middle grade readers, so sort of the 9 to 12-year-old age group. And the main character is a dog named Sugar, and her best friend is a barn swallow named Clive.
Yeah, I love the on your website. I'm looking at that picture. It's a really good drawing of them too.
Isn't that amazing? My friend Tony, who lives in Seattle, did that, and he just captured them so beautifully.
Wow, that's amazing. Those artistic talents of those people that can do that.
I know, right? Yeah.
So whether you're writing historical cozy mysteries or romantic mysteries, I mean, the mystery component is there. Is that a genre that you liked to read before you started to decided to write fiction?
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost the only genre I read. I do like to read memoirs and self-help books a little bit, and I will read the occasional literary fiction, but definitely I'm like 90% mystery novels. And the funny thing is, though, I don't read that many cozies. I tend to like police procedurals and more like sort of private investigator, like the Lawrence Block's Matt Scudder series, that kind of thing. Yeah. So I'm not quite sure how I wound up writing cozy historical mysteries, but that's just kind of what came out at the time.
And so you say you do a lot of research. You actually go to the actual library, the local library there. So when you're getting your story prepared, do you like have a outline ready, or do you just sort of like gather information and then you start to write, or what's your process?
It's a bit of both. Yeah, I would say that I often find inspiration in a local story that I've read. I have books about that area and the time period as well, and so some little nugget of information will kind of spark an idea in me, and then I'll start writing an outline. For sure, I'm an outliner, not a pantser, and in fact have a spreadsheet and have each chapter kind of outlined in the spreadsheet, so I know where I'm going when I begin each chapter. And very often the story does change, though. I mean, it never is the way that I think it's going to quite be. And the last couple of times I've written a book, a mystery novel, the bad guy actually turned out to be someone different than I had originally decided he would be. So that was really interesting when I got to right to the very end of the book and thought, oh, geez, it's not that guy, it's this other guy. So that was really cool. And I figured, well, if it's a surprise to me, then hopefully it'll be a surprise to the reader.
Yeah, because that is an important component of those mysteries, right? It's kind of like a whodunit towards the end.
Yeah. You don't want to know who you don't don't want it to be obvious all the way through who the bad guy is.
So is any of your personality in any of your characters the good or the bad?
Great question. I think Julia is a bit like me in that she's quite determined and quite fiercely independent. She's a little more adventurous, I would say, than I am, and perhaps a little more, I don't know if the right word is brusque, but sort of direct. I guess she's a little more direct than I am. Yeah, but I definitely see shades of myself in her. And then I think, I was interviewing someone on my own show several weeks ago, and she said, each character probably is a reflection of some part of my personality, and I think I agree with her on that. I think characters are like aspects of ourselves, and I find it really interesting to explore their different characteristics through my lens, as it were.
And what about the events in your stories? I mean, are they based on? I know there's a historical component, but are they based on things that actually happened, or where do you get your ideas when you start for your stories?
Yeah, it's a great question. Some of the things that happen in the books are things that happened in real life, things that I found in news stories. So there's one thing I can't talk about because it gives away the plot point for A Horse with No Name, but I'll talk about something else. So this small town called Vernon on the Okanagan Lake in British Columbia, there was a fellow who ran a little ship that would take people down the lake in the good weather before the lake froze over. And it was one of the best ways to move through that part of the world. And in those days, and this was actually something that I learned, it was much easier to move by water than it was by land. And so the easiest way for people to get places was up and down lakes and rivers and that kind of thing. So for a few years, this old fellow had a rowboat, if you can believe it, and it would take him 3 days, and he could only take one passenger at a time because this lake is really long. And he would take them down from the place where my books are set to another town called Kelowna. And then later he was able to get a steam engine, and I was able to see the steam engine. They still have it in the museum in the town in Vernon. And so that fellow has become quite a big part of the books. In my books, he's quite a character. He's sort of the town drunk, and he has to get dried out in order to take his passengers up and down the lake. But he's a good guy at heart. He just likes his drink a little too much. So things like that do come from, real life events that I've read about, or circumstances, or people, and then I, embellish them, make them my own.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I don't think you'd want the town drunk boating you around.
No. Yeah, exactly.
In a river.
Yeah.
So now, when you start, what's your process when you're writing? Do you like write in a specific place all the time, like in a home office, or do you go to the coffee shop? What's your preference when you're in the zone?
Yeah, I definitely cannot write in public places at all. And I know lots of writers do that, and even wear headphones like you're wearing, so they're sort of noise canceling. But I can't do that. So I'm always at home. And for years, I would sit on my couch with my laptop, and that's where I would write. And I lived in an apartment building, and sometimes there could be a bit of noise outside, either in the summer from the street or from the hallways occasionally. So I would sometimes wear earbuds with like the sounds of waves or thunderstorms or that kind of thing, just to block that out. But now I've switched to dictation. So I have the Dragon dictation software, and I wear a set of headsets with a microphone. And I tend to stand up when I do that, and I pace around. So the headset is plugged into my laptop, and it's recording my voice and then transcribing what I'm saying. And I just tend to walk around. The cord's not that long, but it's a little long enough for me to go for a little walk, and that's how I write the first draft of my books now.
Oh, wow, that's cool. Yeah, you can't do that in a coffee shop.
No, that's right. Yeah.
Well, how was the process? Because I know I have a couple of friends who have tried it, and they found that challenging. What do they call that? Training the dragon.
Yep, training your dragon.
Yeah. How was that adjustment for you when you first started to use that?
Yeah, I've heard people complain about that. What you have to do, you have to say the punctuation. So if you're saying a sentence, Bob walked down the street, period, you have to say it like that. And when you're doing dialogue, you have to say open quotation. Bob said, I'm going to the store, period, close quotation, and all that kind of stuff. And that, I think, is what throws people out of their creative flow. But what I found, and that's where people meet resistance and they have trouble with it. But what I found is that just like with typing, I mean, I don't know if you took typing in grade 10 like I did, it's really awkward at the beginning and you have to look at the keyboard and you make tons of mistakes and it just feels like you're driving on square wheels. And when I was feeling that way, I just really kept going, essentially, and knew that my brain would build new neural pathways, essentially, and eventually, just like now, when you're typing and you type a period and then a space at the end of the sentence, we don't think about that anymore when we do it. It just happens automatically. So it's almost the same with Dragon, is that now I can say the periods, insert the punctuation and the quotation marks, and it doesn't interrupt the flow of the story that I'm telling. And the cool thing is that it's increased my first draft word count. I used to be able to do about 1,200 words an hour typing, and now I do 3 or 4 times that in a good hour.
Wow.
So 4,000 words an hour. And my philosophy is that you just get the first draft out as quickly as you possibly can, because you've got all the time in the world to go back and fix it and change it, and that's where the book begins to emerge, is in the revision. But if you don't have anything in the first place, you can't, as the saying goes, you can't fix a blank page. Mm-hmm. So my aim is just to get the first draft out as quickly as I possibly can, and dictation really facilitates that.
I like that saying. I haven't heard that before. You can't fix a blank page. You have to write that down.
Yeah, I think Nora Roberts said that. She's a romance author.
Yeah. And so you try to get through the first draft out there, so you don't go back and self-edit. You wait till afterwards.
That's right. Yeah. And so I think when people have troubles with Dragon, and I know it's not as good on a Mac as it is on a PC, I think the other problem they often run into is that they're editing at the same time as they're writing. So they're watching the screen, and when there's an error, they say to Dragon, go back, which you can do, and change that word to this word, delete, blah, blah. And I don't do any of that. I just turn it on and go. And when it's finished, it's a bit of a mess, but so it is when I type. Mm-hmm. So I just have to spend a little bit of time tidying up, and it's really not that big a deal. And I find that if I just can't edit at the same time as I write, because it breaks up, it just ruins the flow of the story. So I just deal with the mess once it's out on the page.
Yeah, I'm the same way with I don't dictate, but I just write it, and then I don't go back till I'm done. And then it's messy and can be frustrating, but that's part of the process.
Exactly, yeah, and it's a much bigger job to do that revision, I find, than it is to do the actual first draft. Mm-hmm. Like, it takes much longer for me to revise the book than it does to write it the first time. Yeah.
I wish it would come out nice and clean, but maybe with more practice.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, what's your writing day like? Do you write every day? Do you try, or do you have a specific goal in mind? Like you said, X amount of words per day.
Yeah, when I'm doing the first draft, I always do my creative stuff first thing in the morning. So I have a little morning routine, shower, breakfast. I journal every day, and I meditate. So that little stuff, all that stuff takes about an hour and a half, and then, or 2 hours sometimes. And then I always have my creative time immediately after that, whether it's writing or revising. And I do. When I'm in first draft mode, I have a word count goal, so 5,000 words. And like I said, the first hour is usually quite productive. I can do 3.5, 4, and then after that, it becomes I start to slow down. It gets harder because your brain gets tired. So it might take me an hour and a half or 2 hours to reach that word count.
And then when you're revising mode, do you just focus on that one manuscript till you're done then, and then move on to the next project?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If I try to, at that point, to switch to something else, I get completely confused, and I've got characters that are appearing that aren't in that book. They're in a different book. So yeah, I can't do it that way.
I also wanted to ask about your memoir, because I haven't talked to anybody that's written a memoir, and
okay.
Just curious. It must be very difficult. I mean, it's something so personal. How did that all come about? I mean, it's a fascinating. I'm reading the blurb or whatever on it, the description, and wow, you've been through a lot.
Yes, yeah. Well, writing the book was a fantastic process, and I didn't start writing it until I'd been out of the cult for 8 years. So this was a meditation cult in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I left in 2000, and then spent the next 8 years doing lots of therapy, lots of healing work, figuring out what had happened. Because when you're in a cult, you don't call it that. Nobody who's in a cult thinks it's a cult. When you're in a cult, you think it's the answer to the world's problems, and you think it's something good and a force for good and all that kind of thing. So eventually, in 2008, I just got the idea that I wanted to write the book to help other people, because when I was doing my own healing work and therapy and all that kind of stuff, I wanted to read someone's personal story about what had happened to them and how it had happened, and for them to sort of explain to me what the path looked like, both for getting into the cult and then for getting out. And I never could find that book. There's more nowadays than there were back then. So essentially, I wrote the book that I wanted to read. And it was a fantastic process. It was really vulnerable, and it's a weird feeling to have your dirty laundry out there in the world, or some of it anyway. But it was a really great experience, and the nice sort of gratifying thing is it's actually helped people. I get emails from people semi-regularly saying, thank you very much, you helped me to understand maybe what my spouse is going through, or my child, or what I went through personally. So that's been a great experience.
Yeah, that's gotta be. Yeah, I mean, one thing is touching people on fiction, but when you're actually touching someone's life like that, that's gotta be really rewarding.
Yeah, it's been a great experience.
So with back to your fiction stuff, what are you working on now? Are you what series are you working on?
Yeah, so I'm working on The Town Called Horse, the third book in the series. Well, I guess it's the second, really, after the. It's called Horse of a Different Color. No, The Horse You Rode In On. Sorry. And the interesting thing is, the first draft is completely finished, and I got all the way through it, and there's something wrong. And so I've been mulling that over and realizing I actually need to go back and change quite a bit of it, because this is a feeling you can't really explain. It's just somewhere in my gut that things weren't working. So I'm going to go back and do quite a bit of revision on that before I release it. I was hoping it would be out by now, but it's going to be a few more months.
I like your covers too. Do you do those yourself, or do you have a pro do them?
No, I have a pro do them. Her name is Carrie Knutson, and her website is Alchemy Book Covers, I think, and she's amazing. She mostly does cozy mystery novels, but these ones, because they're historical, they have a bit of an edge, and I think she's done an amazing job.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, because usually the cozy mysteries are like they're a little more like I don't want to say cartoonish, but they're more illustrated. But I see, because this is the historical component. There's a little bit more edge to them. Yeah, okay. A lot of stuff goes into putting these books out, aren't they?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the reader has to kind of get an instant understanding of what it is they're getting. Like you had a blog post on your website about one of your covers and how it could have been misinterpreted that it was more like a romantic suspense, and so you added an element so that people knew right away that's a thriller. There's no question at all, and I thought that was so smart. And so when an author's working with a cover designer, you have to be really clear about your genre and the look that you're going for. Right.
Yeah. Especially when we're starting out too. We only have seconds to catch someone's attention as they're perusing Amazon or whatever, or Kobo or wherever. Are you exclusive with Amazon, or are you wide?
No, I'm wide.
Oh, you're wide. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. And just curious, do you still find time to read, or and if you do, are you still reading mysteries?
Yes, yes, and yes.
All right.
Yeah, I still read mysteries. This week, actually, one of my favorite authors released a new book. His name is Keith McCafferty, and he writes mysteries set in Montana. And it's always such a thrill to get a favorite author's new book. And yeah, mostly mysteries, but also now stuff about running an author business.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I read a lot of books about that.
Yes, we need that, don't we? We're doing it all ourselves.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so, are you pretty active then in social media? You can Facebook and Twitter and all those spots.
Yeah, all those regular places. Mostly around my podcast, I would say, and then on Twitter I'm at Art Connects Us, and I do tweet about lots of mystery novel stuff, so reviews and information and all that kind of thing about the world of mysteries all across the genre.
So, what got you your idea to start a podcast? Have you done a podcast before?
I had, I had taken a couple of stabs at it. So I did a short-lived one talking to other kids authors, and then that wasn't quite right, so I gave that up. And then I think I was going to have one too around cult recovery, but that one never really got off the ground. And so it had been kind of on my mind for a while. And then I'm a very introverted person. I don't like networking and that kind of thing in person. Like, I'm not someone who would go to a writer's conference or a mystery conference or anything like that. But I thought a podcast would be a great way to meet other authors and connect, and it really has been. I'm sure you find the same thing.
Yeah, it's been great. Yeah, it's a good way, especially between releases, to kind of still have your pulse in the genre by interviewing other people. You learn so much too.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I feel like now I have a community of people like you and other writers. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. That is one beautiful thing about this. Always. They're so supportive, even like within the thriller genre. I'm sure you find this. People want to help. They want to let their subscribers and their mailing list or whatever know about you or about your books coming out. So it's kind of nice how everyone helps each other out, even though we're competitors.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that about people. It's been a really great experience, and yeah, I find everyone to be so supportive and helpful. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so I'm not going to take too much more of your time here, but anything else you would like to let our listeners know? Just kind of open up the mic to you.
Oh, thanks, Alan. So, I would say that if your listeners, obviously they like mystery and thriller novels, so they can come over to itsamysterypodcast.com as well, where I interview mystery authors just like you do. And my episodes are posted every Monday. And then they can find me and my books at alexandraamor.com, and Amor is AMOR. And that's about it. I'm on Twitter at Art Connects Us, and happy to hear from anyone who's listening.
And obviously, I'll have links to that on the website if people want to navigate to that. But that's pretty easy to find. So
yes, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being on the show, and it was nice talking to you again.
Nice talking to you too, Alan. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. I'd like to ask you to please review and rate this podcast over on iTunes. It really helps me get the word out. If you take a few seconds of your time to do that, it would be much appreciated. You can also visit my website at thrillingreads.com/podcast for show notes on this episode, as well as information about the podcast in general. And you can also sign up for my mailing list there. You'll be getting special offers from our guests, as well as information, behind the scenes information on the podcast. And please do visit my author website at alanpeterson.com. I appreciate your support. And so until next episode, I will talk to you then.